So in this lecture, I'd like to talk about the issue of plagiarism when it comes to multilingual speakers of English. Or more precisely, I'd like to talk about plagiarism and authorship as two sides of the same literacy coin, if you will. And further, I'd like to make a little disclaimer here that I'm not just talking about multilingual speakers of English, but also what I have to say in terms of the classroom can also apply to any writer who is entering into a foreign academic discourse community, regardless of linguistic and cultural background. First, I'd like to define two terms and talk about how they relate to each other. I said plagiarism, certainly, but also authorship. I see these two as two sides of the same literacy coin, if you will. That is, you can't have one without the other, without understanding the other. Authorship to me means the means by which academic individuals communicate the results of their intellectual work by building on the work of their peers and contributing to the construction of valued knowledge within a given academic community. To me, this is the hallmark of academic literacy and the foundation, or one of the foundations, upon which scholarly work in institutions of higher education are founded. Plagiarism, on the other hand, refers to the use of another person's intellectual work, of course, for example, words, ideas, even some would argue visuals, data, and calculations, among other evidence of such work, but without clearly giving appropriate credit to the original source. Now, this is often the definition that we see in college writing handbooks, on course syllabuses, and kind of what teachers generally talk about in the classroom. One point I'd like to make here is that not only do we need to understand plagiarism in terms of authorship, but we also need to consider the multiple dimensions beyond just ethics or technocratic skills that plagiarism on the surface seems to suggest. By ethics, I mean we often talk about plagiarism in terms of laziness or criminality or dishonesty. While this may or may not be the case, with regard to multilingual speakers of English, often the situation is much more complex than that, involving sometimes cultural differences, sometimes involving also language, that is, how we use very sophisticated and complex linguistic structures in English to clearly signal explicitly that this is my idea and this is somebody else's idea, and this is how this is what my stance is on those other ideas and words. Or most of the time, or many times, we often signal quite implicitly through very implicit linguistic evaluations. So here I have sort of the three foundational or three pillars of cultural values and beliefs that undergird certain literacy practices in the US particularly, and then one foundational assumption about learning process. Pillar one is about individual property. That is, words, phrases, ideas, insights, interpretations, opinions, facts, data, statistics, and visuals can be owned like property. This is a pillar in that we often think of words and phrases like property, and property as part of identity. So to steal someone's property is seen as something like stealing someone's identity, in part, almost seen as a crime in terms of plagiarism. Pillar two is connected here. We move to individual identity. Your own intellectual property represents the culmination of hard work that defines who you are and how you are valued in an academic community. So again, to steal someone's property means stealing identity, but then threatens your own, the original author's own status and position within a community. That leads to pillar three, connected here, community membership. Becoming a valued member of an academic community involves speaking, writing, thinking, and believing in ways that are similar to others. Here we get closer to social practice in that we write or speak in academic contexts in order to not only establish our individual identity through words as property, claiming property within the community, but also, and perhaps more importantly to Pillar 3, to become accepted members within that community to show that we think, value, believe, and speak or write in ways that other people of that academic community do. In this way, we become acceptable members of that community. And finally, the foundation is about learning process and taking responsibility or accountability for one's own self-learning. The process of learning involves holding yourself accountable for your own learning efforts as well as for the learning efforts of others in collaborative academic work environment. In this way, true learning involves a change in identity. Now, I go over these pillars and this foundation of learning process in order to highlight that different cultures may understand these values and assumptions in slightly different ways. And I would argue that these values and assumptions and beliefs play out in different disciplines in different ways as well, even within the United States higher educational system.